At 71, Oprah Winfrey, the woman who inspired generations with her wisdom, resilience, and unstoppable drive, now faces a tragedy so raw it has left millions stunned. Behind the cameras, the empire, and the legacy of empowerment lies a heartbreak she could never prepare for. The world has watched her overcome unimaginable struggles before, but this pain feels different, deeper, almost unbearable. What really happened, and how will it change the story of her life forever? Oprah Winfrey's story begins far from the dazzling lights of television studios and red carpets. She was born in 1954 in the small town of Kosciuszko, Mississippi, to a teenage mother who was barely able to care for herself, let alone a child. Her father wasn't around much, and her earliest years were shaped by poverty and instability. For a while, she lived with her grandmother on a farm, where survival meant hard work and constant sacrifice. It was there, in a place of bare cupboards and simple living, that Oprah received one of her greatest gifts. Her grandmother taught her to read before she was even 3 years old. While other children were playing with toys, Oprah stood in church, reciting Bible verses with a voice that already carried the spark of conviction. But life didn't stay still for long. At 6 years old, Oprah was sent to live with her mother in Milwaukee. The move didn't bring stability. Instead, it was the start of years filled with neglect and heartbreak. She often spoke about never feeling safe or wanted during that time. As a child and teenager, she endured abuse that left wounds no one could see, wounds that shaped her understanding of both pain and resilience. By the age of 14, she had gone through more suffering than many people do in a lifetime, including the trauma of giving birth to a baby who only lived for a short while. That grief left her shattered, but it also forced her to face the harshness of life head-on. Her mother, unable to manage her anymore, sent her to Nashville to live with her father, Vernon Winfrey. It was there, under his strict rules and emphasis on education, that Oprah's life began to change. Her father made her study, set curfews, and pushed her to believe she could be more than the broken girl she once felt she was. For the first time, she had structure and someone who demanded the best of her. And though she sometimes resented his strictness, she later admitted it saved her life. By her teenage years, Oprah had already learned to transform her scars into strength. She entered a beauty pageant almost by chance and won, which gave her her first taste of recognition. That opportunity led her to a local radio job while she was still in high school. Sitting behind the microphone, she realized she had found something that felt like destiny. Her voice carried weight, not because it was polished, but because it was real. She didn't hide her emotions, and that honesty made people listen. From there, doors began to open, but the struggles were still very real. She often walked long distances when she didn't have money for bus fare, wore secondhand clothes to interviews, and felt the constant fear that her poverty would betray her dreams. Yet every broadcast, every step forward was proof that the girl who once wore potato sacks as dresses was carving her way towards something bigger. She wasn't just speaking words into a microphone. She was shaping the voice that would one day speak to a nation. When Oprah first stepped into the world of television, nobody could have guessed how far she would go. In the mid-1970s, she was just a young woman working on local news programs, often told she wasn't polished enough for the camera. Executives said she was too emotional, too raw, too unrefined. But what they didn't understand was that this very rawness, her tears, her laughter, her openness, was the thing that made her different. She wasn't trying to play a role, she was being herself, and that authenticity slowly started to break down walls in an industry where polished facades were the norm. Her big break came in 1984 when she was offered a morning talk show in Chicago called AM Chicago. At the time, the show was struggling badly, stuck at the bottom of the ratings, and nobody expected much. But Oprah didn't see a failing show, she saw an opportunity. Within a few months, she completely turned it around. She wasn't just interviewing guests, she was connecting with them. She cried with them, laughed with them, and asked the kinds of questions that audiences at home wanted to ask themselves. Viewers felt like she was one of them, not some distant star looking down from a stage. In less than a year, she had overtaken the legendary Phil Donahue, who was considered untouchable in daytime talk. By 1986, the show was renamed The Oprah Winfrey Show and launched into national syndication. What followed was nothing short of a revolution. For 25 years, Oprah dominated daytime television. Her show wasn't just entertainment. It became a cultural event. Every weekday, millions of people tuned in, not only to hear celebrity interviews or lifestyle advice, but to share in something deeper. She tackled tough issues, child abuse, addiction, racism, mental health, long before most television shows dared to touch them. She brought the painful, the hidden, and the uncomfortable into living rooms across America, and she did it with a mix of empathy and boldness that made people feel seen. But carrying that kind of responsibility came with a price. Being the most watched talk show host in the world meant she was constantly under the spotlight. Every word she said, every guest she brought on, every tear she shed was dissected and analyzed. Some accused her of exploiting people's pain for ratings. Others said she blurred the lines between journalism and therapy. And while she was giving a voice to millions, she often went home exhausted, emotionally drained from carrying not only her own struggles, but also the burdens of those who trusted her with their stories. Her body became another battlefield. Tabloids relentlessly mocked her struggles with weight, plastering unflattering photos on magazine covers as if her humanity were something to laugh at. One day she would be celebrated for her honesty and success, and the next day her body was reduced to headlines and jokes. Oprah later admitted that this constant scrutiny was one of the hardest parts of fame. She had given her heart to the public, but the public sometimes gave her back only cruelty. Still, she refused to be broken. Instead, she turned her success into something bigger than just a show. She founded Harpo Productions, becoming one of the first women and one of the very few Black women at the time to own her own production company. That move changed everything. Suddenly, she wasn't just the star of the show, she controlled it. She wasn't an employee, she was the boss. Harpo went on to produce not only The Oprah Winfrey Show, but also films, television projects, and new stars like Dr. Phil and Rachel Ray. In 2011, after 25 seasons, she ended The Oprah Winfrey Show. It was the end of an era. But Oprah wasn't done. She launched her own cable network, OWN. At first, it was a disaster. The ratings were terrible, and critics mocked her openly. For someone who had been unstoppable for decades, it was a rare and public stumble. She admitted later that the first year of OWN was the hardest period of her career. She worried she had made the biggest mistake of her life, but, just like she had done since childhood, she refused to give up. Slowly, she rebuilt the network, adjusted its focus, and turned it into a success. As the years passed, Oprah's influence expanded beyond television. She became a cultural icon, someone whose book club could turn any novel into a bestseller overnight. She became one of the most powerful women in the world, not only for her wealth, she became a billionaire through Harpo, OWN, and her many business ventures, but for her ability to shape conversations. When Oprah spoke, people listened. When she recommended a book, it flew off the shelves. When she endorsed a product, it sold out. When she backed a political candidate, the impact was felt nationwide. But with all that power came an even greater burden. She wasn't just a television host anymore. She had become a symbol. Someone people looked to for hope, for wisdom, for comfort. That meant she had to constantly walk a fine line between being human and being an icon. She admitted in interviews that it was lonely at times. To be loved by millions, but also judged by millions. To be praised one day and criticized the next. It was a heavy weight to carry. And yet, through it all, Oprah kept building. She wasn't satisfied with just being on TV. She wanted to create lasting change. She opened the Oprah Winfrey Leadership Academy for girls in South Africa, investing millions into giving young women from poverty the chance at an education and a brighter future. She donated to countless causes, funded scholarships, and became one of the most prominent philanthropists of her generation. Her empire grew into billions, but her life was never just about money. It was about using her platform to make a difference. Still, behind the empire was always the girl from Mississippi who wore potato sacks as dresses. The girl who was told she wasn't good enough, who was hurt, abused, and broken. That girl never really went away. She just learned to carry her scars with grace. By the time she reached her 60s and 70s, Oprah had become much more than a television host. She was a brand, a teacher, a cultural leader, and a voice that people trusted, even when they didn't trust anyone else. But no matter how much she built, the spotlight's burden never disappeared. Fame gave her power, but it also demanded pieces of her soul every single day. And while the world saw the empire, what Oprah felt most often was the weight of expectation. The endless pressure to keep being the woman who gave so much of herself to millions of strangers. That is the paradox of Oprah's empire. It made her the most powerful woman in media, but it also left her with the scars of carrying that power for so long. She built something unshakable, but she paid for it with pieces of herself that the world will never truly see. Oprah Winfrey's life has often been painted as a story of success, of a woman who rose from nothing to build an empire. But beneath the applause and the magazine covers lies a far more complicated journey, one scarred by losses that cut deeper than most people will ever know. Her resilience was not born in comfort, but in the fires of grief, failure, and pain. Every decade of her life brought moments that tested her spirit, moments when it would have been easier to fall and never get back up. Yet somehow, each time, she stood again, carrying the scars with her as proof of survival. The earliest wounds began in her childhood, in poverty so deep that she wore potato sacks as dresses because her grandmother couldn't afford proper clothes. Those memories never faded. Hunger, neglect, and betrayal became part of her earliest education. By the age of 9, she was already carrying traumas no child should ever bear. And by 14, she had endured the heartbreak of losing her only child, a baby boy who lived only a short while. That loss haunted her for decades. She rarely spoke of it, but when she did, her words revealed the kind of ache that never truly heals. It was the beginning of a lifelong reminder that even the strongest hearts can break in silence. As her career began to take off in her teens and 20s, she carried these hidden scars quietly. Behind the smiles on local television sets, there was a young woman who often went home alone, hungry, and filled with doubt. She admitted later that even as she began to achieve success, she struggled with self-worth, questioning whether she deserved any of it. That feeling of being unwanted never fully disappeared, even as she became one of the most recognizable faces in America. Success was not a cure for the wounds of her past, it only added pressure to hide them. The decades that followed brought new battles. In 1989, when her younger brother Jeffrey died of AIDS, Oprah's world was shaken. He was only 30 years old. At the time, AIDS carried a heavy stigma, and his illness was met not with compassion, but with whispers and shame. Oprah mourned not just the loss of her brother, but the cruelty of a society that made him suffer in silence. It was a wound sharpened by the knowledge that her fame and power could not protect him from fate. This was a wound sharpened by the knowledge that her fame and power could not protect him from fate. She later said that Jeffrey's death left her with both sorrow and anger, a deep rage that the world had judged him instead of embracing him. In 2003, tragedy came again with the death of her half-sister, Pat, who had battled addiction for much of her life. Oprah had watched helplessly as addiction chipped away at Pat, year after year, stealing her laughter and her future. By the time she died, it felt like a piece of Oprah's family had been gone long before the final goodbye. For Oprah, it wasn't only the loss of a sister. It was the loss of what could have been. The loss of possibility. Addiction doesn't just destroy the person who suffers, it destroys those who love them too. That grief added another layer to the scars she already carried. But life also has its strange ways of balancing sorrow with revelation. In 2010, Oprah discovered something that changed her life forever. She had another half-sister, Patricia, who had been given up for adoption decades earlier without her knowledge. Meeting her was both joyful and heartbreaking. Here was blood she never knew, a sister lost to time, a bond broken before it had a chance to form. They embraced with tears and gratitude, but the reunion was bittersweet. For every smile shared, there was the ache of birthdays missed, years lost, laughter never heard. It was a reminder that life gives and takes in equal measure, and sometimes even miracles arrive carrying shadows. The losses continued. In 2018, her mother, Vernita Lee, passed away. Their relationship had always been complicated, marked by absence and pain. Oprah had long carried the wound of feeling unwanted as a child, and though she built an extraordinary life for herself, that wound never fully closed. Saying goodbye to her mother meant saying goodbye to the hope that one day their bond might be healed, that words left unsaid might finally be spoken. It was a grief filled not just with sorrow, but with unfinished questions. Then, in 2022, Oprah lost her father, Vernon Winfrey. He had been the stern disciplinarian who saved her during her teenage years by enforcing rules and pushing her toward education. She often said that without him, she might not have survived. Their bond was complicated but profound. Losing him was like losing the anchor that had steadied her since childhood. She described his death as leaving her hollow, a word that carried the weight of everything he had been to her, strict, unyielding, but ultimately the foundation of her resilience. And while grief carved deep lines into her life, Her own body became a battlefield, too. For decades, she fought very public wars with her weight. Tabloids turned her body into headlines, mocking every fluctuation, dissecting her humanity as if it were entertainment. She pulled a wagon filled with fat on her own stage to symbolize triumph, only to later say that the image haunted her more than it inspired. The scrutiny left scars that went beyond flesh. Her body became both her prison and her teacher, a reminder that even icons are not immune to pain. In 2021, years of strain caught up with her knees, forcing her into surgery on both. For weeks, she couldn't walk without help. For someone who had carried millions with her strength, to suddenly be unable to carry her own weight was terrifying. She admitted she feared decline, feared that time had finally broken her. But step by step, she fought her way back. She walked miles every day, climbed hills, and rebuilt her strength. It was a quiet act of resilience, proof that even when the body fails, the spirit can still rise. By 2023, she admitted openly that she had turned to weight loss medication. For her, it wasn't about vanity, it was survival. After years of being mocked and shamed, she finally spoke the truth. She didn't dress it up or hide behind excuses, she laid it bare. It was one more scar, but also one more act of defiance against shame. Honesty became her shield, and vulnerability became her strength. Through every loss, every scar, Oprah carried on. She buried siblings, parents, and dreams. She endured a lifetime of judgment. She carried a grief that could have easily destroyed her. And yet, she turned every wound into wisdom, every heartbreak into empathy. That is why people trust her, why millions look to her as more than a celebrity. Her story is not one of perfection. It is one of survival. At 71, Oprah Winfrey does not stand untouched by time or tragedy. She stands as someone who has lived through storms, who has been broken and remade, who has carried losses so heavy they might crush another soul. But instead of hiding those scars, she carries them openly. She wears them as proof that pain does not have to define us. It can shape us, strengthen us, and teach us to keep moving forward, even when the path is heavy. That is the true essence of Oprah's life. Not just the empire, not just the billions, not even the fame, but the resilience to endure decades of scars and loss, and still choose to rise again and again, not only for herself, but for everyone who ever needed proof that survival is possible. At 71 years old, Oprah Winfrey no longer lives in the frenzy of daily television or the chaos of ratings battles. The lights of her talk show are long gone, but her presence remains as powerful as ever. Her life now feels less like a performance and more like a reflection, the quiet crown of a woman who has endured storms and still found a way to give more than she ever took. Her legacy is no longer just about being the queen of daytime television. It is about what she has built for others, about the lives she has lifted, and about the peace she has fought to create for herself. Philanthropy has always been at the heart of Oprah's story. From the beginning of her success, she seemed to understand that wealth without purpose was empty. She poured her fortune into education, believing that knowledge was the one gift that could truly change the course of a life. Her scholarships at Morehouse College in Atlanta have funded the dreams of hundreds of young men, men who might otherwise have been swallowed by poverty or circumstance. They now call themselves Oprah Men, carrying her name into boardrooms, hospitals, classrooms, and communities. For her, that is wealth, not the billions in the bank, but the ripple of impact spreading through generations. Her most ambitious act of giving came in 2007 with the opening of the Oprah Winfrey Leadership Academy for Girls in South Africa. It wasn't just a school. It was a promise to young women who had known only hardship that their future could be different. For Oprah, who once wore potato sacks as dresses, watching these girls thrive in classrooms and later graduate into the world was more than philanthropy. It was redemption. She often referred to them as the daughters I never had, a phrase that revealed how deeply this act of giving was tied to the wounds of her own past. The school became a living symbol of her belief that greatness is not about what you keep, but about what you give away. Beyond classrooms and scholarships, her giving has reached across cultures and crises. When the Smithsonian opened the National Museum of African American History and Culture in 2016, it was her $12 million, 0 cents donation that became the largest single gift. It was her way of ensuring that the story of Black history would never be erased or ignored again. And when tragedy struck Maui in 2023, as wildfires destroyed thousands of homes, she stepped forward with Dwayne Johnson, to launch the People's Fund of Maui. Millions of dollars were placed directly into the hands of survivors, not through bureaucracy, but through trust. For Oprah, philanthropy was never just about charity. It was about restoring dignity where it had been taken away. Her wealth is staggering, around $3 billion, 0 cents today. But for her, it is not a number to boast about. She has always said that success means nothing if it isn't shared. The mansions, the land in Montecito, the private jet, they are symbols of survival, of a girl who once had nothing building a life of abundance. But the true crown of her 71 years is not her possessions. It is the quiet way she has used her fortune to touch lives, to give voices to those ignored, and to create sanctuaries for others to thrive. And yet, in this season of her life, Oprah also treasures quiet. Her Montecito estate, with its horses, gardens, and open skies, is more than a home. It is her refuge. Each morning, she steps outside to the sound of hooves on the earth, the whisper of the ocean winds, and the stillness of land that feels safe. After decades of being dissected by tabloids and carrying the burdens of millions, she has earned this silence. The quiet crown is not made of gold or jewels, but of peace, the one thing she spent her whole life searching for. Still, even in her sanctuary, she has not withdrawn. Her voice remains a steady presence. Her book club continues to shape the literary world, launching authors into global fame. Her interviews, though rare, still carry the weight of truth, as they did with Prince Harry and Meghan Markle in 2021. And in 2024, she launched the Oprah podcast, proving once again that her words, whether on television, paper, or digital airwaves, still command trust. She no longer dominates screens every day, but when she speaks, people listen. Her legacy at 71 is not the absence of scars, but the grace with which she carries them. She has endured poverty, trauma, loss, and relentless scrutiny, yet she has turned those wounds into wisdom for others. She has chosen to give when she could have withdrawn, to heal when she could have hardened, to rise when she could have fallen silent. That is her true crown. Oprah Winfrey's story is not simply about being the richest Black woman in America or one of the most influential people in the world. It is about survival turned into service, pain turned into purpose, and wealth turned into freedom for others. At 71, her crown shines not because of diamonds, but because of resilience, generosity, and the quiet peace she has built after decades of storms.